I was forced to marry a cold, dangerous man, incapable of showing any feeling. At first, I thought it would just be an arrangement, but then Ascanio started looking at me differently. He took care of me in silence, lost control whenever another man came near, and made me believe that maybe he was developing feelings for me, until the night when, in front of the entire Mafia elite, he looked into my eyes and said he had never loved me. Humiliated, I pulled away. Then his greatest enemy showed up, determined to turn me into the most dangerous trophy in the Mafia. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Stone I Do. Louis Cathedral smelled of old incense and damp magnolia. I stood at the back of the nave, the white dress weighing on my shoulders as if my family's entire surname had been stitched into the organza. My father held my arm with the firmness of a man delivering expensive merchandise, and I couldn't decide what hurt more, the thin heel sinking into the red carpet or his silence, which spoke for every word he had never said. Chin up, Fiorenza. Tommaso Sanvitale's voice came out hoarse, low. A Sanvitale doesn't cry at the altar. I wasn't crying. It was worse. I smiled with the corners of my mouth held in place from the inside, the way my mother had taught me when I was still 7 and she was still alive. I smiled at the guests, at the men in dark suits in the pews, at the women with lace veils over their faces. I smiled at the colored light pouring through the stained glass and falling to the floor like diluted blood, and I smiled, at the end of the aisle, at Ascanio Malatesta. He waited at the altar the way a man waits for a signature on a contract. Black suit, dark gray silk tie, an onyx ring engraved with a silver M on his pinky finger. Not a single muscle in his face was out of place. His eyes, dark and impossible to measure, met mine from 20 steps away and didn't waver an inch until I drew close. There was no tenderness there. There was no desire. There was the patience of a man who had already decided everything before I crossed the door. My father placed my hand in his. Ascanio's hand was dry, warm, firm, strange. I felt the onyx ring pressing against my finger like a small, icy threat, and I had to breathe deep to keep from pulling my hand back. Take care of her, my father murmured. I'll take care of her, Ascanio answered. The low voice turned 3 heads in the front row. My way, the priest began. I barely heard. I caught fragments. Protection, fidelity, loyalty between families, but the word love never came. Not once. When the time for the vows arrived, Ascanio lifted his eyes to me and said, in the tone of a man signing a document in front of a notary, I promise protection. I promise that no harm I could prevent will fall upon you. I promise you my name. And that was all. Nothing more. I heard a murmur from the back pews. Someone coughed to cover a comment, and my father clenched his fists in the front row. It was my turn. It was the moment a decent woman promised obedience, fidelity, devotion. I looked at the man in front of me, at the onyx ring, at the crest embroidered on his pocket square, 2 swords crossed over a black rose, and I opened my mouth. I promise respect. The priest blinked. Ascanio didn't. His eyes flickered for half a second, just half a second, and went back to their earlier coldness. But I saw it, and he knew I had seen it. The wedding band slid onto my finger like a cold loop, his onto his, with the same calculated coldness. The priest said something about husband and wife, and Ascanio leaned in and brushed his lips against my cheek. Not my mouth, my cheek, and I caught his scent for the first time. Cedar, something citrusy, a metallic layer underneath, like clean gunpowder. A scent I would learn to recognize in the dark. The guests applauded, empty smiles, glances calculating how much each one of those rounds of applause cost in political alliances and old debts. I walked down the aisle arm in arm with my Mafia husband and swore, silently, that I would not cry. The armored car waited for us on the steps. Bastiano Cervi opened the door. I had seen him twice in my life, and both times had had the same impression. A wardrobe in a dark suit with eyes too alert for a man who spoke so little. Ma'am, he greeted. Don't call me ma'am, I asked. Bastiano looked at Ascanio. Ascanio looked at me. He said nothing. Bastiano repeated, in the same low voice, Ma'am. I got into the car. Ascanio sat beside me, and the leather seat absorbed the silence between us as if it were already used to it. The engine started. The French Quarter paraded past the window in patches of wrought iron and balconies with pots of ferns. I saw a couple on the corner laughing at some joke, and the envy was so quick and so dirty that I closed my eyes. You didn't eat anything at the reception, Ascanio said, out of nowhere. I opened my eyes. He looked straight ahead, his profile cut by the yellow light of the street lamp. I wasn't hungry. Bastiano will have something brought when we get there. I didn't say I wanted to eat. You didn't, he agreed. But you didn't eat. And I don't bring a wife into my house to let her go hungry on her first night. Wife. He had said the word with the coldness of someone listing an item in an inventory. I looked at the band on my finger and felt the urge to laugh. An ugly laugh, devoid of humor. I swallowed it. How thoughtful, I said quietly. Should I thank you now, or only when the bread arrives? He turned his face toward me. For the first time since the cathedral, I saw a muscle of his move. One corner of his mouth went up 0.5 millimeter. It wasn't a smile. It was recognition. His gaze dropped from my mouth to my hand on my knee, lingered a moment longer than it should have, and went back to the window. When the bread arrives, he answered, it'll save us both time. I turned my face to the glass. I felt the heat rise up my neck and hated my own body for it. The Malatesta mansion appeared at the edge of the neighborhood like a fortress pretending to be a colonial house. Iron gates with the crest of the 2 swords, a garden with old magnolias leaning over the stone path, double balconies in dark wrought iron and tall windows that let you see nothing inside. Bastiano drove up to the front, opened the door, and Ascanio got out first. He held out his hand to me. I hesitated for 1/2 second. I accepted. Welcome, Bastiano said, standing beside the frame of the main door, which was made of dark, solid wood with an aged brass lock. Kitchens to the left, library to the right. The staircase leads to the bedrooms. Don't go into the east wing at night. Ask first. I blinked. That's the tour. It is, he confirmed. Are you always this eloquent? I am. I almost laughed. I swallowed the laugh, because laughing on the first night would have looked like defeat. The main staircase was white marble veined with gray, with a wrought iron banister that must have cost someone's great-great-grandparents a fortune. I climbed with my hand sliding lightly along the cold metal, feeling my heel strike each step like a clock counting down my surrender. Ascanio came up behind me. I felt his gaze on my back like physical weight, constant and deliberate. At the top of the stairs, he pointed down a hallway with walls covered in dark wallpaper and 2 paintings of Neapolitan landscapes framed in gold. Your room is the second on the right. Mine is at the end of the hall. I stopped. I looked at him. Separate rooms. Separate rooms. For now or forever. He held my gaze. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was in the same low voice that had silenced an entire hall during the vows. For now, Fiorenza. I promised protection. I didn't promise a bed. I should have felt relief. I felt something else. I won't name it, because naming it would have been dangerous. Good night, then, I said. Good night. I went into the room. I closed the door. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood. I breathed deep, slowly, until I felt my chest loosen. The room was enormous. A canopy bed with raw linen curtains and discreet embroidery along the hem. Tall windows looking out over the magnolia garden. A bronze-framed mirror that gave back a bride with her hair pinned up. The dress wrinkled at the back. And dry eyes. Dry eyes. At least that. I took off my shoes. My feet cried out with relief at the cold floor. I walked barefoot across the thick rug, thick enough to muffle any step, to the window, and looked out at the dark garden. Down below, a figure crossed the stone path with the calm of someone on patrol. Bastiano, probably, or someone like him, with the same economy of movement, the same way of measuring the space around him without turning his head. The mansion breathed like an organism. I was not part of the organism. Not yet. The tray arrived 1/2 hour later. Bread, cheese, a cup of hot tea smelling of fennel, an apple cut into 4 equal pieces with surgical precision. Whoever cut that apple had a steady hand and a sense of order that went beyond duty. I ate half the apple, 2 pieces of bread, and drank the whole cup of tea. I thought of Ascanio saying, "It'll save us both time," and hated the heat that rose again. I traded the dress for a silk nightgown that someone, some invisible housekeeper, had laid out on the bed. The silk was cream-colored, cold at first touch, warm right after. I let my hair down. I turned off the bedside lamp, not the bathroom light. I lay down. I looked at the ceiling. The ceiling had a plaster rosette at the center, with petals worked in layers. I counted the petals. I reached 22 and lost count. I didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. The house made the little noises of an old house, a pipe groaning in the walls, a footstep on the floor below, a window settling against the warm New Orleans wind. I heard everything. My heart was beating too fast for a bride who had not promised love. That was when the doorknob turned. No knock, no warning. The door opened. Ascanio came in with a leather folder under his arm, still in his dress pants and white shirt, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if calm were a garment he wore out of habit. His eyes swept the room with the speed of someone checking a perimeter, found the bed, found me, awake, with the silk nightgown clinging to my shoulders, my hair loose across the pillow, my eyes open. For half a second, the calm failed. I saw it. I saw his eyes drop to the neckline of the nightgown, saw his jaw lock, saw his breathing stop for a quarter of a beat. It was fast, so fast that anyone else in the world would have missed it. I didn't miss it. I had been trained my whole life to read dangerous men by the corners of their faces. He recomposed himself in the span of a blink. "You're awake," he said. "Lo, I am. I came to bring you this." He held out the leather folder. "Your schedule for the week, appointments, times, security. You'll read it in the morning. You don't knock. This house is mine," he answered. And he added, after a pause that lasted too long, "This house is ours. Next time, I'll knock." He took a step. Just one. He set the folder on the dresser, near the door, without coming any closer. He didn't get anywhere near the bed, but the air between us grew thick, heavy with something neither of us named. I sat up in bed. The nightgown slid off my left shoulder. He looked. He brought his eyes back to my face with an effort he probably thought I couldn't see. "Good night, Fiorenza. Good night, Ascanio." He turned. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the knob. He stopped. He stood there, hand on the knob, broad back, shoulders tense beneath the thin fabric of the shirt. I held my breath. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe he would say something. Maybe he would turn around. Maybe he would cross the room in 3 steps and show me that all the vows were a lie. He did none of it. He opened the door. He went out. He shut it behind him with the care of a man who knew that a louder sound would have been a confession. I sat there on the bed. The nightgown slipped off my shoulder, my heart beating at a speed no bride in the world should feel on her first night. Not from fear, not from fright, from something else. The thing I would not name because naming it would have been dangerous. I looked at the leather folder on the dresser. I looked at the new, strange band on my finger, and I thought, with the cold clarity that only comes in the hours when no one sees, this man promised protection. He didn't promise desire, but desire. He just confessed to me without saying a word. I turned off the bathroom light. I lay down. I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. Chapter 2. The Finger, the Glass, and the Almost. 4 days drag through the Malatesta mansion with the slowness of waiting for news that never comes. Every morning, breakfast in the glass-walled garden room. Every morning, Ascanio had already left. Every night, he came back after 10. We crossed paths in the hallway once a day, twice at most. He greeted me with a nod. I greeted him with a nod. Bastiano made silence into a craft. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I put on linen pants, a white blouse, the silver brooch that had been my mother's. I went downstairs. I asked for a car. The foundation, I said to Bastiano, who appeared in the foyer as if he'd been summoned. "I'll go with you, ma'am." "I don't need that." "You do." It wasn't a question. I looked at him. He looked at me. And I quickly understood that arguing with Bastiano Cervi was arguing with a granite pillar. I sighed. "Do you have opinions on teenage art?" "No." "Then the drive will be productive." A muscle at the corner of his mouth moved. I swear it was a smile. The Foundation's warehouse sat at the end of a quiet street. Its facade painted a worn yellow that I always promised to repaint and never did. Delfino Brock waited for me at the door with her arms crossed, in a cotton dress printed with flowers too large and a black pencil stuck in her undone bun. "Look who's back," she said, opening her arms. "The hottest and coldest bride in Mississippi." "Don't start." "Already started." She hugged me, squeezed, let go, looked at Bastiano standing 3 steps behind. "Hello, wardrobe." "Ma'am," Bastiano greeted. "Ma'am," Delphine repeated, giving him a sidelong look. "Ma'am is my mother's title, honey. I'm not there yet." Bastiano didn't answer. Delphine turned to me, raised an eyebrow as if to say this is going to be fun, and pulled me inside. The Foundation was in its usual productive disarray. Easels leaning against the wall, cloth spattered with paint, 3 teenagers finishing a mural on the back wall, one of them humming something I didn't recognize. The smell was oil paint, cheap turpentine, and reheated coffee. The coffee Delphine had left in the thermos since early morning, and that was already bitter enough to bite back. The smell of home. I felt something that had been loose in my chest since Saturday settle back into its right place. You vanished, Delphine said quietly, while we crossed the warehouse. 4 days. Marriage takes over. Marriage or the husband? Both. Did he touch you? I stopped. I looked at her. Delphine held my gaze with the patience of a curator appraising a canvas. No, I said. What? I wanted to ask you that another way, but you're too blunt for flourishes. I laughed without meaning to. It was the first real laugh since the cathedral. I stayed at the foundation until late afternoon. I talked with 3 teenagers about an exhibit we had scheduled for October. I approved the list of new supplies. I met with the curator of a small gallery who wanted to set up a partnership. By the time I noticed, it was almost 6. Bastiano stood near the door with the patience of a man who did this professionally. He sends word that dinner is at 8. He sends word. He does, Bastiano confirmed. I sighed. I kissed Delphine on the forehead. I left. The drive back was silent. The car glided through the French Quarter as the street lamps began to flicker on between the wrought iron balconies, the orange light blurring the shadows on the stone sidewalks. Bastiano drove with steady hands on the wheel and eyes too alert to the rearview mirror. I noticed he looked behind us more often than an ordinary driver would need to. Is someone following us? No. You look like there is. Habit. I didn't push, but I filed it away. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a long, dark mahogany table, silver candelabras, 2 places set at one end only. Ascanio was already there when I came down, with his usual calm, no tie, the sleeve of his white shirt folded up to the elbow. I had never seen his forearm before. There was a thin scar near his wrist, the size of a comma, pale against the tanned skin. I looked too long. Good evening, I said. Good evening, Fiorenza. He stood, a small automatic gesture, and pulled out my chair. I sat. He went back to his. The maid poured red wine into a cut crystal glass that probably had more family history than I did. Bastiano said you spent the afternoon at the foundation, he remarked. Bastiano ratted me out. Bastiano informed me, do you want the report? I want to know if you ate. I looked at him. He cut his meat with a surgeon's precision, without lifting his face. It was the second time this week he'd brought up food as if it were a contract. I ate. I lied. What? I know you didn't eat, but I'll let it slide because you're sitting here. I picked up the glass and took a long sip, just so he wouldn't see the corner of my mouth. We ate almost in silence. We exchanged 3 sentences about the October exhibit, 2 about the weather, 1 about an art auction. The Malatesta Gallery was organizing the following month. Each time I brought the glass to my lips, I felt his eyes follow me for half a second before going back to his plate. Each time he cut his meat with that large hand, the onyx ring glinting in the candlelight, I turned my eyes to the branch of magnolias at the center of the table and pretended I was still hungry. That was how I lost track of my arm. My elbow knocked the glass. 1 second. That was all it lasted. The glass tipped, slid across the tablecloth, and the crystal exploded on the floor in a sound that hurt down to the bone. Red wine spread across the dark wood like slow blood. I'm sorry, I said, already bending down. I'm sorry. I'm a disaster. Let me... Fiorenza. No. His voice came out hard. Too late. My fingers were already gripping a shard of crystal, and the shard was already opening a thin, hot line on my index finger. The blood came before the pain. A fat, dark drop, dripping onto the pale floor. Then came the pain. Shit, I whispered. Before the maid could arrive, before Bastiano appeared at the door, before I even processed it, Ascanio was kneeling beside me. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my hand. He took my wrist with a firmness that was not violence, turned my palm up, exposed the cut. Don't move. I can... Fiorenza. Don't move. I stopped. He pulled out his pocket square, white, with the small crest embroidered in the corner. 2 swords crossed over the black rose, and pressed it to my finger with a calm that didn't match the speed his heart was beating in his neck. I could see it. His pulse jumped under the skin, below his jaw, running down to the collarbone showing because of the undone button on his shirt. It's not deep, he said. It just bleeds a lot. I know. Do you feel dizzy? I feel embarrassed. His eyes rose. They met mine for the first time since the crystal shattered. They were too close. I had forgotten what it was like to have a man kneeling in front of me holding my hand. Embarrassed about what? He asked, low. About breaking your grandmother's glass in the first week. It wasn't my grandmother's. It was expensive. It was. His mouth made a beginning of a smile and went back to the straight line. You're more expensive. I froze. It was a simple sentence, said dryly, without flourish, without emphasis. But the sentence entered my chest like a shard, smaller than the crystal one, and lodged there, driven in, sharp, refusing to come out. He kept pressing the pocket square to my finger. I kept not breathing. The maid appeared at the door. Bastiano appeared behind her. Ascanio lifted his head 1/2 centimeter. Out, I'll handle it. The two of them left. The door closed. The formal dining room was left with just us. The spilled wine, the scattered crystal, 2 candelabras, and the smell of my own blood mixing with the citrus cedar I had already learned to associate with him. He loosened the pocket square. He looked at the cut. It'll need gauze. There's a kit in the sideboard. I know where the kit is. He stood. He walked to the sideboard in the corner of the room. 3 steps. The calm of a man who knew every millimeter of that house. Opened the top drawer. Came back with gauze, antiseptic, surgical tape. He knelt again in front of me. I should have said I would sit in the chair and he could tend to me from above. I didn't. I didn't want to. I let him. The first drop of antiseptic stung. I held my breath. Sorry, he murmured. For the antiseptic. For it being cold. I laughed. It was a short laugh, caught in my throat, and he heard it. He noticed. The corner of his mouth went up 1/2 millimeter and came down again. His hands were large. I had known that since the cathedral. What I hadn't known was that these same hands wrapped gauze around a woman's finger with the delicacy of someone diffusing a bomb. Each turn tight enough to stop the bleeding, loose enough not to hurt. Every gesture deliberate. When he cut the tape with his teeth, because the scissors were on the other side of the table, I looked at his mouth and lost a second of my life I would never get back. He noticed. He lifted his eyes in the middle of the knot. We stayed like that. Me sitting in the chair with my bandaged finger in his lap. Him kneeling between my knees with the tape between his teeth. Our faces at a distance that should not exist between 2 people who had signed a contract. He took the tape out of his mouth slowly. Done, he said, low. Thank you. It was nothing. It was something. The sentence escaped. I wished I had bitten my tongue first. Too late. His eyes dropped from my mouth to my lap, came back to my face. His pulse kept beating in his neck at a speed he would never confess out loud. He moved 1/2 centimeter closer. I didn't pull away. I caught his scent again. Cedar, citrus, the metallic layer underneath. Stronger now, almost dense, as if the air between us had grown too thick to breathe normally. I felt the warmth of his breath hit my chin. His eyes were fixed on my mouth, as if it had just said something quietly that he needed to decipher. I closed my eyes. That was the mistake. The instant my lashes brushed my cheeks, I felt him pull back, not abruptly, in slow motion, like a man forcing himself, muscle by muscle, to undo a closeness that was already done. I opened my eyes. He was standing, 1/2 meter away, his hands in the pockets of his dress pants, shoulders tense, jaw locked. Be careful with your finger tomorrow, he said, his voice clean, as if we hadn't just failed to kiss 40 centimeters off the floor. Change the gauze in the morning. Bastiano will take you wherever you need to go. Ascanio. Good night, Fiorenza. He turned his back. He left the room. The door closed behind him with the same calculated care as the first night. No slam, no sound, with the precision of a man who knew exactly how much force was too much. I sat there with my bandaged finger, my heart beating in the wrong place, the smell of wine rising from the floor, and the frightening certainty, frightening as a knife held to the throat, that this man desired me. This man desired me, and he would rather swallow shards of crystal than admit it. I stood. I walked to the hallway dresser where the maid left the day's mail, because I needed to distract myself with anything at all, and that was exactly where I found it. The silver tray. On top of the tray, a cream-colored envelope, sealed with dark wax. The crest in the wax was not the 2 swords of the Malatestas. It was another, a stylized flower, with pointed petals. I recognized it before I even turned the envelope over. Frangipani. I picked it up. I opened it. An invitation engraved in gold letters. The annual Frangipani family party. Friday, 10 o'clock. Formal attire. No RSVP required. I lifted my face and Ascanio was at the end of the hallway, leaning against the frame of the office door, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Looking at me. He had seen me read it. He had waited. You're going, he said. Is that an order? It's a necessity. Not the same thing. Today, it is. Behind him, inside the office, I saw Bastiano and Renato Pellegrini standing near the desk. Renato, the gray-haired consigliere I had met at the wedding, had a face shut tight as a wall. Bastiano looked at Renato. Renato looked at Ascanio. Bastiano lowered his eyes. I didn't understand the look, but I saw it, and for the first time that week, with my bandaged finger and the invitation in my hand, I felt something that wasn't desire, wasn't anger, wasn't embarrassment. I felt fear. Chapter 3. The Sentence That Broke the Hall. The frangipane invitation sat on top of my vanity for 3 days before Friday came. I looked at it every morning while I pinned up my hair, every night before I turned off the light. The paper was ivory-colored, thick, with a crest of 2 intertwined serpents on the red wax seal. Everything about Gualtiero Frangipane seemed to want to tell me something before I had even met him. When Friday finally appeared, I woke with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the party itself. It had to do with what would come after. It had to do with the man who had been sleeping across the hall for less than 2 weeks, and who looked at me like someone holding a knife against his own chest. I took a slow shower, let the water run through my hair until the ends dripped down my back. The steam fogged the entire mirror, and I stood in the center of the bathroom longer than I needed to, as if the damp heat could prepare me for something. The maid had laid the black dress out on the bed, long-sleeved, a modest neckline in front, and cut low in the back, chosen by Ascanio himself. I had learned, in just over 20 days of marriage, that every gesture of his carried calculation. He dressed me in black not to erase me. He dressed me in black so that no one would doubt to whom I belonged, and even so, he didn't touch me. I put the silk robe over my slip, pinned my hair into a low bun, and crossed the second-floor hallway to the jeweler's room, the chamber where the family kept necklaces, brooches, earrings from generations. Renato had said the night before that I needed to choose a piece from the safe. Show up with something malatesta. The women at the party will read that before they read your face. I didn't expect to cross paths with Ascanio in the hallway. He came out of the office in a dark robe over his open white shirt. No tie. His hair still wet from the shower. He stopped the instant he saw me. I stopped too. Between us lay maybe 4 meters of Persian rug and 100 years of tension that did not belong to me. Sorry, I said, and I don't even know why I apologized. I need a necklace. Ascanio didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped once, over my shoulders, over the curve of silk at my waist, and came back to my face with a coldness so deliberate that it hurt. It was a rehearsed coldness. It was the coldness of a man who must not look twice in order not to fall. Wear the emerald one, he said, low. It goes with the dress. The dress is black. That's why it goes with it. He turned his gaze to the hallway window, to anything that wasn't me, and walked straight past. When his robe brushed against mine, I felt the heat of his body beneath the fabric. Just 1 second of contact, just the edge of the cloth touching my arm, and even so my breathing stopped as if someone had pulled a thread. I kept walking as if nothing had happened. But in the mirror of the jeweler's room, fastening the emerald around my neck, I saw that my hands were trembling. The necklace was cold against my heated skin. The green of the stone looked almost sarcastic in the reflection, too elegant for a marriage that had never been more than an arrangement. I learned in that instant that the worst kind of desire is the one the other person tries to hide with a stone in your face. The Frangipane mansion sat at the end of a tree-lined street in the Garden District, separated from the world by a wrought iron gate covered in jasmine. The driver stopped before the white stone staircase. Bastiano opened my door before I even touched the handle. Ascanio got out from the other side, adjusting his shirt cuff with 2 precise gestures, like a man closing his armor before battle. "Ma'am," Bastiano said quietly, offering his arm so I could get out of the limousine without tripping on the length of the dress. "Anything happens, I'll be 3 steps away. 3 steps doesn't save me from a bullet, Bastiano. Saves you from a comment, which hurts more." I almost smiled. Almost. Ascanio came to my side and offered me his arm without saying anything. I rested my hand on the curve of the black jacket and felt, beneath the fabric, the tension in the muscles of his arm. Everything about him was on alert. Everything about him was reading the night the way you read a map of war. We climbed the staircase together. Footmen in white gloves opened the double doors. The main hall swallowed me in a wave of light, perfume, and champagne, the kind of heat that comes from too many people in a closed space, from too many conversations happening at once at a volume too low to seem natural. I had been to New Orleans elite parties before. My father took me on his arm when he still thought I would marry some banker's son from Atlanta, but the Frangipane party was different. The women wore dresses that looked like armor. The men talked low, with glasses held still in the air, as if every word were counted and charged. The waiters circulated in absolute silence, with trays too heavy for ordinary carriers. It was a party that dressed itself up as a party. Underneath, it was something else. Ascanio introduced me to 3 men whose names I couldn't keep, kissed the hands of 2 matriarchs, and led me to the corner where Renato waited with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The consigliere greeted me with a bow so small that only I saw it. "Mrs. Malatesta," he said. "Welcome." I still hadn't gotten used to that surname, even less to the way Renato pronounced it, like a man checking a knife before sheathing it. Ascanio stepped away to greet someone else. I stayed with Renato for a while, talking about nothing, watching the hall. That was when I saw Gualtiero Frangipane for the first time. He stood on the other side of the hall, near the main staircase, with a glass of champagne in his hand. 39 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, in a sand-colored suit no one else would dare wear to a formal party, and yet he looked like the most elegant man in the room, his dark hair combed back, a small smile, eyes that seemed to find the whole world amusing, eyes that were fixed on me. By the time I noticed, he had already noticed that I had noticed. He tilted his head slightly in a greeting no one else saw. I looked away like someone closing a door. "That's Gualtiero," Renato said quietly, without changing his expression. "Don't cross the hall alone tonight." "Are you giving me an order, Renato?" "I'm giving consigliere's advice. Mr. Malatesta doesn't give orders to his wife at an enemy's party." That stuck in my head like a splinter buried too deep to pull out with my fingers. I excused myself a little later to go to the powder room. The hall was getting hot, and the champagne I hadn't drunk still rose to my temples from all the perfume of other people. Bastiano walked me to the door of the side hallway and waited outside. 3 steps, as promised. The powder room was a chamber the size of my dining room, with green velvet armchairs and a mirror that covered the entire wall. The brass sconces above the mirror cast a slightly golden light over everything, the kind of light that makes any face look more rested than it is. I sat in one of the armchairs, closed my eyes, breathed. The silence in there was almost physical after the hall. That was when they came in. 2 women, roughly my age, in glittering dresses, excessive perfume. They didn't see me in the corner armchair. They went straight to the mirror to touch up lipstick and whisper. "So did you see his wife?" the first one said, laughing low. "Dress chosen by the husband, necklace chosen by the husband, rehearsed smile. An arrangement between families, dear. It's not a marriage, it's a contract. At least she's pretty, too pretty for an arrangement. That's why he doesn't even touch her. Did you know they sleep in separate rooms?" The second woman laughed. "Ascanio Malatesta will never love a contract wife. He pays, he protects, he puts the photo in the paper. But love, that man doesn't love. That man decides." I waited until they left. Their lipstick was still drying on the mirror when I rose from the armchair, the emerald weighing on my neck like a chain. I went out. The side hallway gave me back to the hall with the noise returning in a wave. Voices, crystal, the pianist playing something French at an accelerated tempo. Bastiano noticed something in my face and took a step toward me. I stopped him with a small gesture. "Where is Mr. Malatesta?" "Talking with Mr. Pellegrini near the main staircase." "Ma'am, are you—" "I'm fine, Bastiano." I wasn't, but I was already crossing the hall. I saw Ascanio before he saw me. He was standing near the foot of the staircase, glass in hand, listening to Renato in a low voice. The whole hall churned around them. Laughter, glasses clinking, the pianist in the corner playing something French. I crossed all of it with my eyes fixed on him, feeling the weight of each step on the marble as if the floor were about to ring out. I stopped in front of him. I lifted my chin. "Can I ask a question?" Ascanio looked at me with that trained neutrality. Renato took half a step back. "Not here," Ascanio said, low. "Right here." I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. I had the kind of voice that cuts through a hall without having to rise. A few heads were already starting to turn. "Do you keep me out of convenience? Or out of something else?" That was what I asked. That was exactly it. I didn't calculate the question. It came out of me the way a knife comes out of a sheath that's too tight. I saw only his face harden the instant something, out of the corner of his eye, caught his attention near the main staircase. I saw his gaze touch 3 different points of the hall before coming back to me, as if he were checking instruments before playing. I understood none of it at the time. I saw the jaw lock. I saw the glass in his hand tilt 1 millimeter more, the ice striking the crystal with a small sound no one else heard, because the hall was already growing quiet around us. "I never loved you." His voice came out clean. Calm, loud enough to reach the opposite wall. The hall went silent. It wasn't a metaphor. The pianist stopped in the middle of a note. The bartender stopped pouring. Two matriarchs turned their heads in slow motion. Someone dropped an olive into a glass with a crack of crystal that sounded too loud. I felt the blood rise to the roots of my hair and drain back down, leaving my skin cold. I looked at him. He looked at me with eyes like wet stone, hard on the outside, with something sliding inside that I couldn't name in that instant. For half a second, I thought I would cry right there. For half a second, I thought I would hit him with both hands flat against his chest. I did neither. I lifted my chin 1 millimeter more, turned on my heels, and crossed the hall with my head high. People made way for me as if I were carrying something contagious. I saw Renato lower his head as I passed. I saw Bastiano take a step toward me and stop. I shook my head once, and he understood that 3 steps behind was enough. I crossed the foyer, where the noise of the hall arrived muffled and the light of the chandeliers was colder. I crossed the double door. I crossed the white stone outer veranda, where the magnolia air hit my face like a damp slap. The New Orleans night had the brief chill of late autumn, the kind that gets into your sleeves without warning. I rested my hands on the wrought iron railing and felt the cold metal cut through my palms like punishment. And it was there, with my hands trembling on the iron, that I heard footsteps behind me. "Ma'am, you'll freeze." The voice was deep, calm, faintly amused. I didn't need to turn around to know whose it was, but I turned anyway. Gualtiero Frangipane stood 2 steps away, holding a black wool coat by the shoulders. His hair was slightly mussed by the wind. The smile was still small, as if he were amused by some joke only he had heard, or as if the joke were the whole night and he the only one who knew the ending. I said nothing. He took a step. He held out the coat. The silk of the lining gleamed yellow in the light of the veranda lamps. "I brought it for you. I don't need it. It's 45 degrees, Mrs. Malatesta, and you left the hall without a coat. Whoever saw the scene imagines you're still answering." His hand held the coat in the air with the patience of a man who had waited for harder things. I looked back. Through the double doors, I caught a glimpse of Ascanio standing in the middle of the hall, glass in hand, with 5 men around him talking all at once. He was looking straight at the veranda, looking straight at me, looking straight at Gualtiero's hand, and he made no gesture. He didn't come. He didn't call. He didn't wave. I turned my face away. "Thank you," I said, low, and let Gualtiero place the coat over my shoulders. The wool weighed more than I expected. His perfume, something woody, expensive, faintly citrus, settled on my shoulders like a signature I hadn't asked for and didn't know how to give back. I pressed the fabric against my chest with both arms crossed, less because of the cold and more because of the need to hold on to something with hands that were still trembling. "No woman should be treated like a leftover," Gualtiero said, low, too close to my hair, by a man who's afraid to desire her. I closed my eyes. I wish I could say I felt nothing. I wish I could say I recognized the maneuver right away. The offered coat, the calculated sentence, the venom wrapped in silk. I wish I could say I gave the coat back, turned my back, and went back into the hall. I did none of it. I pressed the coat closer to my body, lifted my chin again and looked Gualtiero in the eyes for the first time up close. His eyes were light brown, with something gold at the edge of the iris that the lamplight brought out. Eyes trained to look kind. "You don't know me," I said. "For now." He smiled, took half a step back, made a small bow, and went down the veranda staircase toward the garden, leaving me alone with the wind, the magnolia, and the black wool on my shoulders. When I turned my face back toward the hall, I saw Ascanio still standing in the same spot. The glass in his hand had a thin crack running across the crystal from one side to the other. Not a single muscle in his face moved, but the ice inside the glass had begun to melt. Chapter 4: The Trophy and the Traitor. 10 days passed, the way days pass when you've stopped counting. I left the Malatesta mansion the morning after the party with a small suitcase, the band still on my finger, and Delphine's address on the tip of my tongue. Bastiano drove me in silence. When we brought the bags down to her apartment, he lingered at the door a moment longer than he needed to. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I'll be in the car downstairs. 24 hours. You need to sleep, Bastiano. I sleep in the car. Bastiano." "Ma'am." That was the whole conversation. He went down. The black car stayed parked on the corner of her building for 10 straight days. I saw it from the window every morning when I opened the curtain. The same dark car, motionless as a promise no one made out loud. The driver changed. The shift changed. It never left. Ascanio never showed up, never called, never sent a note. But Bastiano stayed down there, and I knew what that meant. Delphine's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in the French Quarter, with French windows that didn't seal well, a wooden floor that creaked at 2 specific spots in the hallway, and a permanent smell of coffee and oil paint that had soaked into the walls over the years. She had turned the 2nd room into a personal studio, with easels at 3 angles and cans of paint stacked to the height of the window, and gave me the guest room with a yellow quilt that seemed to shout from the bed. "The quilt's new," she said, on the first day, leaning against the frame. "I bought it thinking of you." "Why yellow?" "Because you're in too black a moment." Chromatic balance, dear. That was Delphine's way of caring, a joke in her voice, food on the table, a yellow quilt on the bed. In those 10 days she tried to feed me everything: gumbo, beignets, cinnamon coffee, salad with 5 different greens. I ate half. She ate the rest and complained that I was being incompetent at grief. "I'm not grieving," I said, on the 3rd morning, stirring coffee without drinking it. "I'm furious." "Worse. Anger burns calories, Delphine. Eat the beignet, Fiorenza." I ate the beignet. The powdered sugar stuck to my fingertips, and I wiped it on the napkin harder than I needed to. It was also on the 3rd morning that the flowers began to arrive. The first delivery was to the foundation. I was in the warehouse going over the budget with Aldo, the painting monitor, a quiet man with gray hair who treated every teenager there as if they were his nephew, when the delivery man appeared with a bouquet the size of a child. Rare white orchids, the kind that only grow in a controlled greenhouse, with a dark, dense foliage around them that made the white look even more absurd in that low-ceilinged warehouse. A card sealed in cream. "For the lady who deserves flowers that don't wilt easily." Gee. Aldo looked at the bouquet. He looked at me. "Ma'am, that bouquet's worth more than the roof." "I know. Do you want me to throw it out?" I looked at the orchid a moment too long. Their white was almost offensively beautiful. I thought of the frangipane veranda, the black wool, the voice too low near my hair. "Put it on the reception table," I said. Aldo said nothing, but I saw the way he looked at me before turning his back, a look that said everything he was too kind to say out loud. The second delivery arrived at Delphine's apartment on Thursday. Red camellias arranged with precision, all at the same height, as if someone had cut the stems with a ruler. The card, "You were the only elegant thing at the party. G." Delphine read the card over my shoulder and whistled low. "Or the man is going all out. He's laying siege. It's the same verb, dear. Be careful." The 3rd delivery came on Friday. Black lilies. I didn't even know black lilies existed, and their color was an almost bluish dark, dense and strange, as if they'd been hand-painted. The card. "Friday, there's a vernissage at the Bellucci Gallery. 8 o'clock. If you show up, I show up." And I showed up. I didn't go for the reasons Delphine thought. I didn't go to see Gualtiero. I didn't go to provoke Ascanio. I went because the Bellucci Gallery was one of the few that still bought work from young, nameless artists, and the foundation depended on that kind of buyer. I went for my teenagers' money. At least that's what I told myself in front of the mirror, while I pinned up my hair more calmly than I felt. I put on a red dress, mine, bought by me, without the influence of any Malatesta man. The fabric fell straight to the knee with a seriousness that contradicted the color. Delphine looked at me from the door with a raised eyebrow. "Red to a vernissage? Red to a vernissage. Then it's war. It's red, Delphine." She didn't believe it. Neither did I. Bastiano drove me. He didn't comment on the dress. He didn't comment on the destination. He just parked in front of the gallery and said, without turning his face, "I'll be out here. It'll take a while. I'll stay until you get tired." The Bellucci Gallery was crowded, with that specific heat of a closed room and too many people, expensive perfume mixed with white wine, and the soft aroma of old wood coming from the frames. Large paintings, small glasses, conversation in 3 languages. I greeted Bellucci personally, talked about the 3 pieces he had bought from the foundation the month before, thanked him with all the precision I had learned at my father's table. I circled the paintings for 10 minutes. I spoke with 2 known collectors. Everything normal. Then Gualtiero came in. It wasn't an ordinary man's entrance. He came accompanied by 2 henchmen, an expensive coat draped over his forearm, the same small smile as always, and before even greeting the host he found my red dress across the room. It took him maybe 2 seconds, like a man searching in a crowd for something he already knew exactly where to find. He walked toward me without hurry. People stepped aside by instinct. "Mrs. Malatesta," he said, giving the small bow. "You came. I came to see the paintings. The paintings survive without you. I wasn't so sure about that. You survive a lot, from what I hear." He laughed low, a short, contained laugh that didn't reach his eyes, but reached the corners of his mouth with the naturalness of a man who'd been practicing it for years. "Will you accept a glass?" "I'll accept conversation. I get my own glass." He offered me his arm anyway. I didn't take it, but I walked beside him across the room like someone walking beside an open window on the 3rd floor, aware of the possible fall, unable to stop looking down. He introduced me to 3 European collectors who said, in a slightly rehearsed tone of praise, that they had heard very good things about the Foundation's work. They said they would buy 3 pieces. 4, maybe. I smiled politely. I thanked them. I made a mental note of every name and every promise, and it was at that moment that I saw, on the other side of the room, 2 men standing near a bronze sculpture. They weren't talking. They weren't drinking. They were looking at me with the discreet, permanent attention that Bastiano's men devoted to doors. It took me 2 seconds to understand, then 3 more to accept it. Ascanio was protecting me from afar. I didn't see Ascanio in person that night. I didn't see him on the other 4 occasions that Gualtiero appeared at events where I was, during those 10 days. But at every one of them, always on the other side of the room, 2 different men kept watch. Always 2. Always Malatesta. Always with that specific posture of men who hadn't come for the party. I hated and thanked them in the same breath, and the contradiction burned somewhere in the middle of my chest that I preferred to pretend didn't exist. I went back to Delphine's apartment that night at 11:30. She was still awake, painting something abstract in red paint in the studio, barefoot, and with a smear of paint on her forearm. She looked up when she saw me at the door. How was it? I sold 4 of the Foundation's paintings. Good night, then. Gualtiero was glued to me for 3 hours. Bad night, then. I took off my heels at the entrance, crossed the studio barefoot, and sat on the paint-stained sofa she insisted on calling vintage. Delphine left her brush soaking in the cup of water and came to sit beside me without hurry. "Fiorenza. We need to talk about something." I turned my face. Delphine had her eyebrow furrowed, a rare thing, for her, since she usually saved seriousness for emergencies. "The man tonight at the vernissage," she said, "offered you his arm in front of half the French Quarter. I'll be blunt. The city is talking." "Talking about what?" "That Mrs. Malatesta accepts flowers from a frangipane." I sat staring at the wall for a long while. The studio smelled of turpentine and cold coffee, and somewhere on the street below an old radio played music too low to identify. Delphine didn't interrupt me. "I know what he wants," I said finally, low. "I know he looks at me like a trophy. I know every flower is a maneuver. I know that coat on the veranda was calculation. And you accepted it anyway. And I accepted it anyway. Why?" I swallowed hard. Delphine waited with the specific patience of someone who has heard a lot of hard things and knows that pushing doesn't help. "Because it hurt less," I said. "It hurt less to have a man who looked at me like an object than a husband who called me nothing in front of 200 people. Delphine didn't answer right away. She took my hand with both of hers, squeezed slowly. "Fiorenza," she said, low, "you're my best friend in the world. I love you. And I'm going to tell you something you won't like to hear. Tell me. Gualtiero is not an alternative. He's a different poison. And Ascanio is what he is. But you're only going to be able to decide anything real in your life after you go there and look him in the eye one more time. Not to come back. To really end it." I stayed silent. The jazz kept going outside, even lower now. "There are Foundation documents in his office," I said, finally. "Last quarter's reports. I need to get them before the audit. Then go get them. I could send Aldo to fetch them." "You could, but you won't." I looked at her. Delphine smiled. A small smile. No joke. The kind she almost never gave, and that for that reason weighed more. "Get the documents, Fiorenza. And while you get them, decide." I set it for Saturday afternoon. I sent word through Bastiano, who received the word, gave that minimal bow of his, and said only, 4 o'clock is fine, ma'am." On Saturday morning, I woke before the sun rose. I lay in bed listening to the building wake up slowly, the creak of the floor above, the window banging in the wind, the smell of the coffee. Delphine was already making in the kitchen at 6 in the morning as if the world depended on it. After a while I got up, put on the simplest navy dress I had, pinned up my hair without a mirror, slipped on flat shoes. It wasn't a wife's visit. It was an employee's visit to pick up files. At least that's what I told myself. The band was still on my finger. I hadn't taken it off once in 10 days. Not by conscious choice, and I simply hadn't. Taking it off meant deciding, and I still hadn't decided anything that wasn't provisional. At 3:45 in the afternoon, Bastiano parked in front of the iron gate of the Malatesta mansion. The garden was still the same. Giant magnolias with that dense, glossy foliage, short grass, jasmine tangled in the gate perfuming the air in an almost excessive way. I got out of the car with my chin high. I crossed the gate. I crossed the white stone path. I climbed the 3 steps of the front veranda with steady steps, like someone whose heart isn't beating against the ceiling. And it was then that, from the large window at the top of the main staircase, I saw Ascanio. He stood up there, hand on the banister, charcoal gray suit, no tie, looking straight at me, looking straight at my left hand, looking straight at the band that still gleamed on my finger, 10 days after everything. For half a second, neither of us breathed. For half a second, I knew, without him having said anything, without my having asked anything, that this afternoon would be the last chance he had. I also knew, in that same half-second, that it was the last chance I had to walk out of there still whole. I lifted my hand to open the door. Chapter 5. The Wall, the Truth, and the Morning. I crossed the gate of the Malatesta mansion, with the band still on my finger, and my courage hanging by a thread. Delphine's driver didn't turn off the car. I'd arranged that he would wait 15 minutes at the end of the street, and that if I didn't come back, he would call her. It was the only rope I had tied around myself before going in there. The afternoon air was heavy with magnolia, in that New Orleans way that makes any perfume seem like an accusation. I climbed the 3 veranda steps with the foundation documents under my arm. The leather folder was the excuse I carried. The truth was something else, and it fit entirely inside the question I was afraid to ask. Bastiano opened the door before I touched the bell. He wore his usual jacket, with the holster hidden by the cut of the fabric. He looked at me, looked at the folder, looked up, toward Ascanio's floor. "Ma'am," he said, making space. "Bastiano." He didn't comment on my wrinkled dress, nor on the fact that I'd arrived unannounced, nor that my hand was trembling holding the strap. He offered me the way through. I went in, smelling furniture wax and old cigar, the smell of that house that had been mine for 3 weeks, and that still treated me like a guest. "He's in the office," Bastiano said, without my asking. "I know the way." I climbed the main staircase slowly, the documents hugged to my chest. With each step, I counted a sentence I had repeated in my head since the vernissage. "Gualtiero at least isn't ashamed to desire me. You traded me for an audience. Get my name out of your mouth." Sentences I had collected like stones, to throw when the time came. At the top of the 2nd floor, I realized none of them served. I hadn't gone there to fight. I had gone there to end it. The office door was ajar. I pushed it. Ascanio stood behind the desk, his back to me. He looked at the window as if the view of the garden could answer something I had never managed to answer in bed, alone, those last 3 weeks. He had taken off his jacket. The white shirt marked his shoulders, and his dark hair caught the last sun of the afternoon as if it wanted to be touched. He turned before I spoke. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed, in fact, like a man who had waited 10 days for that door. "I came to get the documents," I said, because it was the sentence that fit in my throat without tearing it. "They're in the 2nd drawer." "I know." I walked to the desk without looking at him. I opened the drawer. The foundation contracts were stacked there, with their own rubber band, exactly as I had left them 3 weeks before. He hadn't touched them. He hadn't read them. He had only kept them, as if they were the last trace of a wife he still called mine in some reserved corner. I put the contracts in the folder. I closed it. I lifted my eyes. "Done," I said. He didn't answer. He stayed standing, one hand on the back of the chair, his knuckles white from the force he pretended he wasn't using. "You're not going to say anything?" I asked. "What do you want me to say, Fiorenza?" "Anything. A word, an insult, I don't know. Something that proves the man who knelt in front of the broken glass wasn't an actor. I'm not an actor. Then you're a coward." The word came out before I could hold it back. I saw his jaw harden. "Maybe," he said, low. I thought I would collapse right there. I thought I would cross the room, pound his chest, scream everything I had swallowed in the Frangipani hall. But what came out of my mouth was something else. "Gualtiero at least isn't ashamed to desire me." He moved. It wasn't a step. It was a decision. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and before I could back away, he gripped my wrist firmly and pulled me out of the office, toward the hallway wall, beside the doorframe. He let go of my wrist the moment my back touched the plaster. He braced one hand on the wood panel beside my head. The other stayed in the air, not touching. His forehead pressed against mine. His breath came out uneven, hot, and the smell of old whiskey and cedar hit me as if I had never felt it before. "Don't say that name again," he growled. "Not in my house. Not in front of me. Or what? Or I lose what's left of me." I felt the cold wall at my back, and his breath burning my lip. His hands were trembling. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. The hands of a man who never trembled at anything. Trembling now, held in the air, centimeters from my face, as if touching were a pact he still didn't have permission to sign. "You said you never loved me," I whispered, in front of everyone. "I know what I said. Then let me go." He didn't let me go. He lowered his mouth to mine, and it was a kiss that didn't ask permission to exist. It was deep, long, tasting of whiskey, of contained anger, and of 3 weeks of silence. I grabbed him by the shirt before I thought. My fingers crumpled the fabric as if it could anchor me somewhere. I felt his tongue find mine with a calculated hunger, the hunger of a man who always calculated everything, and then with a hunger that lost count. And then I pushed myself away, not with force, with decision, my hands on his chest. I pushed until I created 15 centimeters of air between us. He let me push. He didn't try to pull me back. He stayed there, his forehead still tilted, his breathing still uneven, his black eyes fixed on mine. "The truth," I said, my voice catching. "Now, no version for an audience, no prepared sentence. The truth, Ascanio, or I walk out that door and the band stays on your desk." He lowered his face. It was the first time I saw that man lower his face in front of me. It wasn't shame, it was weight, as if he had spent the last weeks carrying something on his shoulders and had finally found somewhere to set it down. "There was a man by the staircase," he began slowly. "Dark shirt, hand inside his coat, gray hair cropped close. The shooter, Mauro Veneri, paid by Frangipani." I felt my stomach drop. Why didn't he shoot? Because he wasn't there to kill me. I stared at him. He met my eyes, and what I saw in them was the most naked thing I had ever seen inside Ascanio Malatesta. He was there to watch, Ascanio continued, to see who mattered to me. 3 of Frangipani's men were there too, spread across the hall, observing every gesture I made. If I had asked you to leave carefully, if I had moved you away from that side of the hall, if I had even turned my face in your direction with an expression different from the one I used to greet the port senator, they would have known. They would have known you were the piece that had to be taken off the board to break me. And then you would have died before dawn. I leaned the back of my head against the wall and closed my eyes. The tears came, quiet, without sound. I always knew how to cry without sound. The Foundation taught me. In 1,000 nights of exhaustion, you could have gotten me out of there. There was no way. I had less than 6 seconds between you crossing the hall and asking me that question. If I apologized, if I denied it, if I hesitated, anything, he would know. I only had one sentence that erased everything. And it was the most expensive sentence I have ever paid. You erased me in front of all of New Orleans. I erased what they could use against you. I couldn't erase the pain. I know. I opened my eyes. He was leaning against the opposite wall now, his hands shoved in his pants pockets, his chin down. He looked smaller, not less dangerous, less armored, an Ascanio I had never seen, and that I suspected, for an instant, no one had ever seen. "And Veneri?" I asked. "He doesn't breathe anymore," he said, simply. "Last night, it was quick, it was clean, it was far from the French Quarter, and the man who was selling your movements from inside the house has also been taken care of. I'll tell you his name when you want to hear it." He took his phone out of his pocket, slid his finger, and held the device out. The photo was low resolution, taken by a party camera. A man with gray hair cropped close, black shirt, hand inside a dark coat, beside the marble staircase of the Frangipane mansion. The same man I had passed that night without noticing, because I was too busy holding my humiliation like an expensive dress. I handed the phone back without saying anything. "You chose to break me rather than trust me," I said. My voice came out lower than I wanted. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. He took a while to answer. When he did, it was to some random point on the rug. "I didn't know another way to keep you alive." I sat down, not in a chair, on the floor itself, my back against the hallway wall, the Foundation documents abandoned in some corner of my memory, the wrinkled dress around my knees. He looked at me, and then did something I didn't expect. He sat down too, on the office floor, on the other side of the door frame, his back against the oak desk, his Italian shoes crossed, his shirt wrinkled, his hair fallen over his forehead. We stayed like that for a time I couldn't measure. The sun dropped to the height of the window and crossed the hallway with honey-colored light. I looked at him. He looked at the floor. Neither of us spoke. And even in the silence, something between us settled, not in peace, not in forgiveness, but in the shared exhaustion of two people who had spent everything they had on not telling the truth. I had decided to leave, I said, after a long while. I went all the way to Delphine's door with the band in my pocket. I even took it off. I saw the white mark on your finger at the vernissage. You were there. 2 cars, 4 men. You didn't see, but I saw everything. I knew there was someone. I didn't trust Frangipane near you. You don't trust me near anyone. No, he said. I don't trust the world near you. It's different. I swallowed hard. I stood slowly, my palms on the floor. He followed the movement with his eyes, but didn't move. I crossed the hallway without hurry, and stopped in front of him, and bent down. I held out my hand. He looked at the hand the way you look at a loaded gun. Then he placed his fingers in mine, and stood. We stood there, in the hallway, too close and too far at the same time. I'm not leaving today, I said quietly, but I'm not staying either. I know. You know? I've known since the vernissage. I brought my face closer. The kiss, this time, was different. It was slow. It was a request he answered without urgency, without calculation, without an audience. It was the kind of kiss I had never received in my life, the kiss of a man who was tired of pretending he didn't love me. I felt his hands rise carefully to my waist, and his fingers tremble again, and this time, I let them tremble. I rested my forehead against his, and said, with no force at all, "Come upstairs with me." He came up. The bedroom door closed behind us, and the rest of the night stayed on this side of the threshold, where no hall, no board, and no shooter could enter. I woke before him. The morning light came through the linen curtains with a calm that house had never had. He slept on his stomach, his arm thrown across my waist, his breathing slow. I watched for a while that felt generous. The scars on his back I had never seen, the line of his shoulder falling over the sheet, the onyx ring on the nightstand, beside my band, which he had taken off at some point in the night. I got up without waking him. I put on one of his shirts, the kind that stayed folded on the armchair. I went down the stairs barefoot. The kitchen smelled of coffee. Bastiano had left a coffee pot ready on the stove. No note. I poured 2 cups before thinking. Ascanio appeared at the door a few minutes later, in pajama pants and a white t-shirt, his hair tousled in a way I had never seen on that man outside the bedroom. He accepted the cup. He leaned against the frame. He looked at me with a tenderness I didn't have the vocabulary to describe, the tenderness of a man who knew that morning was alone. He came closer. He brushed a strand of my hair away with the back of his fingers. Slowly, like someone handling something broken. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I drank the coffee looking at the band I had set on the table, beside the sugar bowl, when I came into the kitchen. I had put it there without thinking, or thinking too much, maybe. "You loved me," I said, after a while. "I love you." I felt the air hit a place in my chest that had been locked. "You chose to lie before telling me," I continued, "before giving me the chance. You decided for me that I wouldn't be able to handle the truth in the moment. I decided. And I don't know if that's love, or if it's the version that fits a man like you." He lowered the cup. He took a while to answer. "Maybe it's both," he said, low. "And maybe you're right, not to want to stay today." I held out my hand. I touched his face. My fingers spread along his jaw, and he closed his eyes. I felt the stubble of one night, the warmth of recent sleep, the man who had slept beside me and whom I hadn't been able to hate even when he broke me. "I need to learn to choose myself before I choose you again," I said. "Otherwise I come back out of absence, and absence passes." "I know." I took the band from the table. I looked at it with my palm open. The gold caught the light from the window and gleamed in a way that seemed to ask to stay. I put it in the pocket of his shirt. "Keep it," I said. "Don't throw it away. When I come back, if I come back, I want to know where it is." He pressed the fabric with his hand over the pocket. He tilted his forehead to rest it against mine. He didn't kiss me. He just breathed with me for a few seconds, as if shared air could count as a contract. "Go," he said, "before I ask you to stay." I went up, changed my clothes, got the document folder from the office. In the hallway, I stopped in front of the wall where he had pinned me the afternoon before. I rested my hand on the plaster, like someone saying goodbye to a familiar corner. I went down the stairs with the folder against my chest. Bastiano waited for me with the door open. He didn't comment on my messy hair, the wrinkled dress, the eyes red from the short night. He just tilted his head as I passed. Ma'am, Bastiano, take care of yourself. It was the longest sentence he had ever directed at me. At the gate, Nello was sitting on the step, his backpack at his feet. 15 years old, thin, his curly hair cut short, his sketchbook under his arm. He stood up when he saw me. Miss Fiorenza, Delphine said you'd be coming by, he said, without looking me in the eye, in his shy way. Can I ride with you to the foundation? You can, Nello. Get in. I opened the car door for him. He got in carefully, the way he entered any expensive place, afraid of breaking something. He sat in the passenger seat with the sketchbook in his lap. I went around. Before opening my door, I looked at the veranda. Ascanio stood on the threshold. No suit, no mask, no audience. Just a man holding a woman's wedding band in the pocket of his pajama shirt. He didn't wave. I didn't wave either. It was better that way. I got in the car. I closed the door. I looked at my bare left hand on the wheel, the white mark of the ring still clear on the skin, lighter than the rest of the finger. For half a second, I asked myself whether letting go had been strength or had been fear of finding out I still wanted to stay. The thought passed. I dropped the band into my pocket. I started the engine. I looked at Nello, who had opened the sketchbook and was drawing something with a pencil that was too short. What are you doing there? A sky, he said, and finally smiled. What color? Green, he said, without hesitation. I'm in the mood. I smiled for the first time in 10 days. I pulled the car out of the street and drove on, through the sleeping French Quarter, toward the foundation. The morning sun came through the windshield, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee.
I finally had her. Fiorenza in my arms. The warmth of her body against mine. The whisper that the nightmare was over and that New Orleans would be ours. Then came the explosion. Nello's small body torn apart on the floor of the square. The wooden toy she herself had given him charred beside it, her blood on her hands as she tried in vain to revive him. 3 days later, the doors of the community closed in her face. Anonymous letters with a single sentence. You brought the monster inside. While she curled up in bed, her eyes empty, repeating that the bomb was her fault, I found the first piece of evidence on the kitchen table. A fragment of a detonator with the unmistakable signature of someone who should never have gotten so close. The woman I would kill to protect now looked at me as if I were the real killer, and for the first time I knew that the vengeance running in my blood could destroy the only bond that still kept me human. And what if she never forgives me? And what if the choice between hunting them and holding her has already been made? As she pulled away from me again, I discovered an even crueler truth about who was behind it all. And for the first time in my life, I had to choose between the vengeance I had always known, or the only woman I couldn't lose forever.
Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform. From Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales, this content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.